Welcome to the Gentleman Project podcast. I'm Kirk Chugg.
And I'm Cory Moore. We're lucky today to have the great Bill Engvall with us. Bill's a famous comedian in this country, that's for sure, and just such a wonderful, nice human being. And so we're honored to have him on the podcast. Bill, thanks for being with us.
Well, thank you guys. I laughed during the introduction because my wife can tell you that I am do not consider myself a celebrity in any facet of the word. It's more like I'm just kind of an idiot that just kind of stumbled into the right car, but I'm honored that there are very few places I could go in this country that somebody wouldn't know who I am. And when I started in this business, that was not even in the equation, that I could go to Ames, Iowa and sit in a restaurant and somebody will say, "Hey man, you're Bill Engvall." And that's really weird to wrap your head around, the fact that, that they know who you are. And then I got something the other day, an email from, it wasn't Spotify, but it was one of those sound exchange kind of things. And they say, "Congratulations, you've had 600 million downloads." I was like, what?
Wow.
Yeah. And my second thought was, well, where's all that money? But it's an honor to be on your podcast. I look forward to this. And hopefully by the end of it, maybe somebody will go, "Wow, I didn't know that about him."
Yeah, and that's kind of why we wanted to have somebody like you on. And we've talked a little bit about this, but let's touch on this a little bit. Like, there's more to the guy, Bill Engvall, more to the man than the bits. You're a family man. You're somebody who wants to leave a legacy. You can tell that. I went on a road trip this last weekend over spring break with my kids. We drove all the way down to Arizona, which is where you are. Mm-hmm. And we visited the Grand Canyon, and we listened to Bill Engvall bits on the way down. And my kids, they're the new generation, so they haven't necessarily heard blue collar comedy or anything like that before. But it was fun to say, hey, this was somebody that I kind of grew up with in my teenage years listening to, who I thought was hilarious. And Dad gets to talk to him on the podcast next week. They were super excited.
Well, that's first off, either you must have been punishing your kids to listen to me all the way to Arizona from Utah. But it is, it's an interesting point that you bring up, that there's a generation that probably doesn't know who I am or what blue collar was, or that's one of the battles that, I won't say battles, but one of the things that you fight and face is that how do you stay relevant and stay yourself to appeal to the younger generation? And I found that the way that I do that is that's worked for me is just to keep it real. I mean, to keep it relatable. I get young comedians all the time ask me, what do I need to do? And I always tell them that you got to keep it relatable, because if people don't, that's why I don't do like political comedy or anything that's edgy or anything, because it's pretty much, it's got a shelf life. And, but people talking about family and mom and dad and my brother, my sister, that stuff goes on for generations. I mean, you think about how many times you're at a family reunion or something, and invariably it ends up talking about the old story, like, you remember when you were little and you did this? So it doesn't have a shelf life. It can go on forever. But the problem you face, or at least that I'm facing, is that I am older, and television and movies and all that, they want the young, they want the youngsters. And so, my television career now is going to be pretty much relegated to being the granddad or something like that, which is fine. But, it's like, it's kind of a hard pill to swallow sometimes.
Well, the reason that I wanted to have you on the podcast is, quite frankly, I was so impressed by your son. I had this interaction with Bill's son that I didn't know it was Bill's son. We were at a resort in Utah, and Bill's son was working at the resort. My wife had car issues, and Bill's son, I think it's Travis, isn't it?
Yep.
He helped my wife for about an hour with the most kind, customer service focused attitude, and she would have been a mess without him. And lo and behold, Later that day or the next day, I see him with Bill, and I'm just like, wait. That's Bill Engvall's son. And I had to tell Bill how amazing it was. So you did something right there, in my opinion.
As my dad said, told me a long time ago, he said, you throw it against the wall and you hope it sticks. Family has always been the first thing in my life. One of the things Gail and I decided early on was we were going to really try our best to separate career from home life. Too often, they cross and you lose sight of what's really important. I always said that all I wanted from my kids was to be good people. Don't be a leech on society. And it's like with Travis, this sounds cliche, but one of the first things I taught him was you shake someone's hand, you look them in the eye. That goes a long way. I think people sometimes think that's just an old, people in older, but I'm gonna tell you, my proof is if a kid does it to you, you find yourself going, oh, hey, and you want to interact with that person. And so I got to give credit where credit is due here. Gail was just, and still continues to be, just the rock of this family. I've traveled, and early on in my career, I'd be gone 6-8 weeks in a row. And she was there to raise the kids. And we kind of laugh about it now, but it used to be that when I would come in from the road, it was party time because Daddy was home. But there was things that I had to get called on the carpet for, like, we don't do that here. So
and it was you getting that lesson.
Yeah, it was me getting that. And so, but we did a really good job with that. I think, it wasn't always limos and private jets. And, when we would go up to Park City, when we lived in LA, we'd fly Southwest. And and we did that for a number of reasons. It just financially didn't make sense to haul the family up in a private jet to go skiing, which, a lot of people do. But I also think it creates an environment in your kids' minds that's what's normal. And as I used to tell my kids all the time, I go, this is all going to end. Like in my business, in show business, I knew that there was a day coming that there would be that, not that people didn't like me, but they just move on. There's somebody new or younger. And you got to be able to look in the mirror and say, I'm okay with this. I used to tell people all the time, we have a ranch in Texas. And it's my getaway place. And in the little town outside where the ranch is, there's a feed store. And one day a buddy of mine and I were talking, and he said, how do you want to be remembered in your career? And I said, I want to be remembered as that guy who was playing checkers on the front porch in the feed store. And somebody walks up and goes, hey, weren't you? And I can go, yeah, I was, but I don't have to, be somebody else. And I think that's I think actually one of my biggest issues right now with younger parents is that there's too much concern on being your kid's best friend instead of being their parent. And when people say, they go, what do you mean by that? I go, just know that as a parent, there's going to come a time when you're going to have to lower the hammer. And if, I'm not saying you got to be, the strictest parent in the world, but like now my kids are grown, they're old, they got their own family. So I get to be their best friend now. If they want my advice, great. If they don't, that's fine too. They'll make it on their own. But when they're little, I saw a lot when my kids were, in junior high and elementary school stuff, that these parents were more concerned that their kids thought they were hip and that, my mom and dad let me drink at the house. It's like, that all sounds great, but it's going to come back to bite you. And I think, and I bring this all back around to your experience with Travis, Cory, is that, Travis was, it's kind of a funny story because our daughter, Emily, was born a 34-year adult. She just was one of those people you never had to say, did you do your homework? Did you turn it in? And she grew up around adults because I was in the club circuit, and a lot of times I'd have to take her and Gail with me. And so she grew up around adults. Well, Travis came along, and Travis was just a normal boy, but we were just like, what the hell is going on? This kid is out of control. I remember Gail and I host this charity event in Austin called the Lone Star Paralysis Foundation, which raises funds for spinal cord injuries research. And Travis was probably 16, 15, 16. And I'll be honest with you, I was worried because he just wasn't getting it, as far as life goes. And I was talking to one of the brain surgeons there, a neurologist, and I was joking. I go, I don't know what's going on with my son, but I can't get him to focus and get with it. And he goes, don't worry. He said, and I thought this was fascinating. He said that the synapses in a boy's brain don't connect as quick as a girl's brain does, which is why you historically see women do better in college, in that sort of, because they figured it out. The synapses connected. They went, oh, okay. And this doctor said, don't worry, when he's about 22, 23, you're going to see it. And it was like a light switch. One day he was about 24 years old and we were talking. All of a sudden I went, wait, we're talking about a subject that he shouldn't know about. And he finally got it. But Travis has always been that great kid that he's just so personable and he really wants to help people out. And boy, that's all you can ask from your kids. You just, and my daughter's the same way. They go out of their way to help other kids. And like I said, I give credit to Gail for that.
So, Bill, in a lot of your comedy, you reference your family. Mm-hmm. In a lot of the stand-up that you've done that I've listened to, you talk about how unique your family is and the traditions and some of the uniqueness about your family. A lot of the things that you talk about, though, are things that are funny during the bit, but it sounds like you've learned a lot from your family. Can you go into some of the things that you learned from people like your parents and your grandparents?
Yeah, my dad, I'll go back further. My granddad was my hero. He always made time, like when we would go visit him, that we just couldn't wait to get there because he got us involved. Yeah. And I think I'm going to take a quick, I thank God that I grew up without video games because I have that personality that I'd have been addicted to them. But when we would go visit my granddad, we were out in the garden digging his potatoes or planting, or he'd take us fishing or down to the park to go swimming in the river. And he wasn't that granddad that just kind of sat around and waited for you to ask him to do so. He had stuff planned, and grandmother was the same way. And my dad was very much the same way in the sense that dad always got us involved in stuff, even though we'd gripe and moan about it. We went on family camping trips. We were always doing stuff around the house. I tell you, something that my dad used to do, and at the time we hated it, but looking back on it now, I thought it was a brilliant idea. I was probably 5th grade, and my sisters were all younger than me. But every week we had to write a story, like a 1-page story about anything that we wanted. And then Sunday night, we had to get up and read it in front of the family. And at the time, I couldn't figure out why we were doing this. But then I realized that he was teaching us in a way that wasn't in a classroom, and that it was family time. That was when everything was shut off, the TV, nothing was on, and you had to be a part of the family. And I do think that the family unit has taken a real hit lately for a number of reasons. One, both parents are having to work now. My mom was there when we got home from school. She was there when we went to school, and it was a real bonding time for the family. And dad was always very funny anyway. And I credit my humor from him, even though I remember one night we were sitting there talking, and here's a guy who was a general practitioner for some 40 years, and then just decided to go back to college and become an anesthesiologist. It's like, and did it like in a year. It was a small town, and everybody knew everybody, and so we had the spotlight on us early because dad was one of 2 doctors in the town, so everybody knew us, and you couldn't get away with anything. But dad really, while he was really fun to be around and had a lot, he was also, you had to follow the rules, and if you didn't, if you stepped out of line, you were gonna, my dad never hit us. None of us got spanked once. Because he didn't have to. He could get that look that when you can keep doing this and die, or you can stop and live. And and so it worked. And I never had to spank my kids either. Because I think you don't have to. Like when we'd be sitting in church, and if you remember, as a kid, there was nothing funnier than in church because you weren't supposed to laugh. And my dad would sit with his arms resting on the back of the pew. So to the other people, it looked like he was hugging the whole family. But in reality, that was an aiming device. Because if all it took was for one of my sisters to do something, say something, and we were, and then you'd get his thing was thumping you on the head, like, and I don't know how he did it without everybody else in the church seeing it, but we always got it. He was good at it. We used to call it the brain thumper, and it was, you didn't want it.
Well, you said, your dad put the family first, and you have done that also. That's not always easy.
No,
it's not easy to put your family first, especially when you're have a budding career and there's 1,000 things your kids have going on. And so talk to us about, how did your dad do that? And how have you done that? What things have worked? What things maybe haven't worked?
That's a great question. Dad was, this was back when doctors still made house calls. And so, the phone might ring at 6 o'clock in the evening. It may ring at 3:30 in the morning, and he'd have to go out. So one of the things that he always did was he tried his best to at least when he would come home from work for at least an hour, that we would just kind of hang out and kick the football in the front yard or whatever. And but then as I got older, I remember, and this is kind of a sad thought, but it's I remember when I officiated my father's funeral, that I brought up a story that I remember Dad would say, "Hey, let's go outside and throw the football." And I was always like, "Oh, I'm going to go hang out with my friends," or, we're going to go ride bikes or whatever. And I wish I could throw the football with him again. It's like, I think, but that's, that's a kid's, from a kid's perspective. But Dad always did. Now, for me, and Gail because I used to get really depressed about this because I was gone. So I missed Travis and Emily walking and talking for the first time. I missed a lot. That really can throw you into a major depression when you realize that you're kind of the show up every once in a while dad. But Gail, to her credit, used to tell me, she goes, "Yes, you're gone, but when you're home 24/7. So she goes, "You probably get to see your kids as much, if not more, than someone who works 9 to 5, but they have to leave at 7 to get to work at time, and they don't get home till the kids are in bed." So she said, you can't beat yourself up about this and it was funny because later on in life, I apologized to both my kids. I said, "I'm really sorry that I wasn't there." And each one of them said, "Hey, it was your job." So I think kids are a little more resilient than we give them credit, and they're a little smarter. But I think it's important to be present, to just be now, use them. Cory, I see you with your kids at the club all the time. And I've mentioned it to Gail that how I was impressed even before I knew who you were, that, you make the time to engage them and to talk with them. It's not like you're off with your buddies and they're all at the table waiting for you to come back. A lot of dads can just sit in the same room with their families. They're not interacting with them at all. What I mean by being present with them is to be engaged in listen to what they're saying and ask them questions. And as Gail always said, she goes, if you ever want to know what your kids are up to, just drive carpool, because somehow kids think that you're deaf when you're driving the car, and you will hear everything that's going on in their lives. Because if you just ask them, they won't tell you. I had a real spiritual moment in my life that changed me, what I think for the better. And my relationship with my kids now is unbelievable. We call each other, we talk to each other so much more than we ever did. Because I think we all kind of think that maybe, I don't know why we think this, because no one's ever promised us this, but we're not here for very long. And especially if you've got kids and your listeners out there who are family men and women, when we were first pregnant with Emily, everybody said, "You better, it goes by fast." I'm like, "Shut up." But it does. You guys know, it's like they're born and you turn around and they're backing the car out of the driveway, and then and for a dad, it's hard because, especially with a girl, that someone's going to take your place. They don't stop loving you. They don't forget you, but there's another guy there now. And that's really hard. That was at my daughter's wedding. That was the only thought I kept thinking was like, I'm not the first guy in her life anymore. And that's good though. That's a good thing because they need the change by that time. And but yeah, I just think that when I get asked about family life and what do I think about it, I don't give any big deep thought. It's just that's why I go just be present when you're with them. Don't give them the time, pay the attention to them. You don't have to do it for 8 hours a day, but just if your son or daughter comes in and says, "Hey, Dad," they'll ask you something. Be there, be present, and ask them what they think. And it's amazing what you'll see.
I'm just so afraid of my daughter's getting married. I don't want to see that day. I don't want it to come. You can just leave that out of my life. Well, I'm sure it'll be great. But when you were talking about that, that's like one of my worst fears for some reason.
And I think it's a valid fear because you've been the hero for so long, and you got used to that job. When Emily was getting married, I pulled her husband aside. He's a great guy. And I said, I don't ask a lot. I said, but there's two things you need to know. There's only one wedding, and you better treat her like she deserves to be treated. And that's it. It wasn't like I'll come and find you and shoot you or whatever. I just said, you just treat her the way she is, and you and I will get along just fine. And he does. And but it is a weird thing when all of a sudden you realize that this guy may be around for a while. And thank goodness we liked him because I don't know what you do if they find out. My fear was the kid would show up with the nose ring and the face tattoos and, his name's Flash or something, and like, what do you do for work? Oh, mow yards. Like, oh God, no.
Well, it really at the core of what we're trying to do here with the podcast is, talk about these moments of like when your daughter's getting married and what that's like and the preparation that goes into the years before that moment of what are you teaching her to look for in a man when she gets married? Why is it important that he treats her a certain way? And where has she learned those habits and those things from? It's more than likely been some men in her life, and you're probably number one on that list.
Well, I agree with you. I do think, and if Cory, if this makes you feel any better, they tend to marry someone like their dad. And that's a very reassuring thought. Although if you'd have seen me in college, you probably would have said, you ain't the guy I wanted my daughter marrying. But
your nickname was Flash.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't Flash, but it was. I was not on the top of a lot of dad and mom's list. I can tell you that. But yeah, they. I think you're right, Kirk. That they do tend to find those people that were influential and thought like they do. Even though Emily and I have completely different opinions on politics and all that, but we respect each other, and that's goes so much further. And we laugh about it. We've never had any kind of discussion that ended up with somebody storming out of the room. It's so much fun to watch them grow. Now they have we have our granddaughter who's 15 months, and it's fun to watch Emily be a mom. And she does things that I don't agree. There's a lot of things I do agree with, but like, I have to kind of do stuff on the down low, like sneaking autumn, animal crackers, and you can have a sip of Papa's shake. It's like.
Well, do you guys have any mantras or sayings as a family? Are there things that you say, these are things that we do as a family, or these are sayings you have as a family, any of that kind of thing?
Our mantra was that our family always comes first. It doesn't matter what the situation is. If it's family, that takes priority over everything.
You spoke briefly about an experience that you thought maybe we'd go into later in the podcast, a spiritual experience that changed kind of the way you were.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to go into that?
Yeah. So as of Saturday, I am graduating from college that I started in 1976. And
congratulations.
Thank you. It's been a tough 3 years, but I finally got my cap and gown. And of course, thanks to the pandemic, I don't get a walk, so they're going to do it virtually, which sucks. But what happened was I would say that before this moment, I was what I would call a marginal Christian. We took to church on Easter and Christmas like everybody. And so what happened was a 3 years ago, I got called to do a job on Tim Allen's show, Last Man Standing. And I was playing this character called Reverend Paul. And I had played a lot of characters in my career. I've been fortunate and blessed to have been able to do quite a bit of work. But for whatever reason, this character really kind of sat with me. I was like, I really kind of dug it. It wasn't just a put on the face mask and go deliver your lines. So I have a friend who is a retired Episcopalian priest. And I called him one night and I said, hey, do you got any books on like Theology 101 or Theology for Dummies or whatever it is? Because I'm just starting. He goes, yeah. So he got me a couple books and I started reading some of these theological books. And I really found that I dug the history of the Bible. One night, Gail and I were lying in bed and she was sound asleep. And I was just kind of laying there in that nether sleep. You're not asleep, but you're not awake. And I swear, you guys, as clear as I'm talking to you right now, I heard a voice go, now you're doing what I want you to do. And I got up, walked around the house because I felt like that's what I was supposed to do, but I knew what it was. And the next day I enrolled at Grand Canyon University to get a bachelor's in Christian studies. And then I got ordained online as a minister, which that was the impetus for going to school was when the certificate that said that you're a minister. I thought, if I'm going to do this, I want to know what I'm talking about. I don't want to just be that guy. And so I finished up Saturday and going to take a break and then probably going to enroll in like a non-denominational seminary school. But the point of the story is that it changed me. It changed me in a way that I didn't know needed to be changed. And it's that now I know what my purpose on this earth is. And I know how much I've been blessed by God with my family and to be able to do the things I love to do. And so I've started a thing on Facebook. It's called on my Facebook page. It's called Sunday Mornings with Bill. And basically all I do is give a 10-minute inspirational speech, a little talk about how do you get through this next week? Maybe we'll read a Bible verse and say, this is what it means to me, and it's been phenomenal. The response, my retired priest friend said, because I get like 50, 60,000 people that view this. And he said, do you know how many pastors would love to have a congregation that size? But and I don't tell people what to think or how I think they should think. This is just, me saying, hey, this is how I look at it. And I have found that my view on life has been completely changed. That I don't really worry about stuff as much as I used to because I can't control what's happened. I can't control what's going to happen. All that can happen is be right here and now. And that's a great place to be in. And it was weird the first time one of my college, I was telling because every year me and 3 of my college buddies go down to the ranch for about 3 days and just hang out. And I was telling them my old college roommate who was a psych major, he was all into it that I was doing this. And my other friend who's kind of an idiot said, oh, so you're not going to become one of those God people, are you? And it was weird to hear me say, yeah, I think I am. Listen, my personal belief is that everybody has their own relationship with God or whoever you choose to follow. And it's not my job to change you. It's, my job just to be there if you want to talk, if you need some encouraging words. And I think that that's kind of where religion has taken a hit lately, especially families going to church. I always felt like Gail and I handled that really well in the sense that we gave the kids a basic Christian education in Sunday school and stuff. And then as they got older, we let them make their own decision. But I think one of the reasons that you've seen a decline in the families going to church is because of the pastors. The pastors themselves have caused people to turn away because they start preaching to people as if they're God instead of just preaching to them about God. And so it's been an event in my life that tomorrow will be very special. I can't wait to. I'm going to put a video up about just me in my cap and gown and talk about how. And my only regret is that my dad didn't live long enough to see me do it. So if you got a kid in college and you're worried about the 5-year plan, try the 46-year plan. You'll be very happy.
Well, I'm fascinated and impressed, quite frankly, that you've done that. I didn't know that. What an amazing thing to do.
I will tell you, it was hard because to kind of give some humor to the somewhat serious subject. Basically, I graduated high school with no math at all, and so when I went back to college 3 years ago, of course, I had I started college in 1975, and my first grade point average was 0.76. So I was not a great student. So I had to retake a lot of classes before I could get into my major classes. And one of the things I had to do was to take a math class, a college math class. Well, when you go into a college math class, they assume that you've had algebra 1 and 2, geometry 1 and 2, trigonometry, physics. I had none of that. And so I was in this math class and I was getting, Gail helped me out a lot, but I had to hire a tutor. But one of the humorous things that came out of the math class was I actually called my math professor one time and I said, let me ask you a question. I go, why does a Christian studies major need a math class? I go, the only numbers I need to know is there was 12 apostles, there's 10 commandments, and he spent 3 days in the grave. That's pretty much all the numbers a Christian student needs to know. And he said, you have a good point. He said, but you still have to take the math class.
I don't make the rules here.
Yeah, I'm just do the math and shut up. And it's funny because you think back, like now I'm graduating with a 397 grade point average. And I look back and I was telling Gail this one night, I go, I wish I'd have had this when I was in college the first time. It'd have been so much more fun to do what I did and still make good grades. She goes, you weren't ready then. And that's where I really buy into the spirituality of it, that God knew I wasn't ready. But now I'm ready. And wherever it leads, I don't know, but I'll more than likely follow that. But back to the pandemic thing, all I wanted to do was walk across have them announce my name and let me walk across the stage. And then COVID went, no, we're not going to let you do that. So we're going to have a little party here and go out to dinner tomorrow night. And one of the messages I want to give to people who out there who may have been in my situation of, you didn't get it, you can always finish it. I've learned that there's nothing you can't do if you just put your mind to it. And, I had to make up 3 years and it was papers and all that, but I always found the time. And I tell you, that was the other thing I wish I'd have known, because I took a course in time management, which I think as a parent should be required. And it goes back to what we talked about earlier, that you just make the time. You've got to make I know we seem to be as a society so caught up in I've got to make this much money and I just got to keep. And it gets you got one life. There's not a reset button. So when you have those kids, just say, I'm going to take 30 minutes. I'm going to take an hour a day. And it's just me and the kids. You'd be amazed how far that goes.
Now that you've, you're like a preacher now, or a.
I guess I am. Yeah.
That's cool. And I'm now going to make sure that I look at your Sunday lessons. So you have that in your life. You're a grandfather now. Mm-hmm. You've had this. How long have you been married?
39 years.
39 years marriage. So you have
to
some
the same woman.
Yeah, that's right. You have some experience under your belt. So if you were to talk to the fathers and mothers that are listening to this podcast, what would you tell them? What would your advice be if you sat down with a young man who was starting his life as a father? What would you say? What would your advice be?
I think that's a great question, Cory. I think the first thing I would say is remember that you're an example. Kids are aware of everything that goes on in a household. They know it, whether you think they know it or not. Be the person you want your kid to be. If you want your kid to grow up to be a good person, be a good person. You're their idol. They may not say it to you, but you're their idol. You're all they know. as who their hero is, and that's dad or that's mom. One of the things that Gail and I did, we always made sure we showed affection in front of the kids, like holding hands or kiss, a kiss. And it was okay for the kids to see us to be upset with each other, because that's how they learn how to deal with their own issues. And we never raised our voices. Even if Gail and I were upset with each other, when we discussed it, it was discussed in normal tones. But I think that would be the biggest advice I'd give them, is to be the example that you want your kids to be. And also, this is huge. Listen. And don't just listen with your ears. Listen with your heart, because they're going to come to you and they're going to want to know things. And, a lot of people don't want to, they want to avoid sensitive subjects. I always had this thought that I'd rather my kids learn it from me than learn it at school, because by the time a kid tells about it, it's awful. A great example was, like when I was a young man, Playboy was the Playboy. We found my dad's secret stash of Playboy magazines, and me and my buddies would look at them. Well, fast forward, Monday, I walked in my son's room and he was on his computer and he was trying to click it off, but he didn't realize that the more you click it, the more that brings up different ad sites for this sex site or whatever it was. And I could have, I found myself at a fork in the road, and it happened very fast. And I said, I can either get upset with him, or we can sit down. This is a prime time to sit down and talk to about the relationships between men and women. And I said, look, buddy, I go, this is completely normal. You're curious. You want to know. You're starting to get interested in girls. And I said, and that's great. I go, but what you're watching right there, that don't happen. Trust me. I go, and I didn't want him to look at women in any kind of demeaning way. And I think that's what pornography does. Kids aren't stupid. Talk to them, as adults. You don't got to dumb it down for them too much. Now, young kids, they don't know any difference, but, one of the things that really was effective for me was when I would watch my dad, and he never avoided any subject. Sometimes I wish he'd have done things different. Like when I got interested in girls and I said, I'm going to need to talk to my dad about sex, because I thought, he's a doctor. He's got all the ends, man. I know, I've got the ace in the hole right here. He's going to tell me everything. And he gave me like a cartoon book to read. I remember like, wait, what? They can handle it. Use your words cautiously, but don't be afraid to shy away from it, because then I think what happens is that creates an environment of they don't want to talk about it. And that's when things go off the rails.
Yeah, you've made excellent points there. And it's something that we haven't had yet on the podcast, something that I know that we all deal with as parents in an age of smartphones and technology. You're all going to have to deal with it at some point to have a healthy conversation about it. Otherwise, it's going to come from other places. Cory and I have talked about this privately. And it's a challenge to know how to approach it and how to react to it and how to protect your kids from this type of stuff. But at the same time, giving them enough freedom that they can make their own choices. And because you're not always going to be there looking over their shoulder, and to instill in them those values that even when nobody's looking, what's good for you and what's bad for you.
Right.
I can help you understand those things, but I can't always be there telling you not to do something.
Yeah.
Because eventually they're going to pay their own cell phone bill. They're going to have their own internet, and they're going to have to make those choices for themselves. So a fantastic conversation starter. We should probably do a whole episode on this. And we'll probably reference this episode.
Well, I think you're great. You're right, though. Instead of teaching our children the responsibility of sex, we're too concerned with just shutting them off. And like, as any parent will tell you, if you tell your kid, don't go over there and get that cookie, buddy, as soon as your back's turned, they're at that cookie jar. But if you say there's a cookie there, and It's your choice. You can have, and you explain it to them, lay it out for them. Teach your kid about these urges. Tell them that they're completely normal but here's what you need to know could happen. There's diseases. There's this, and it's the same now just with drugs. I never told my kids don't do drugs. What I told my kids was, here's what the choice is. You may take a hit off a joint and it does nothing for you and you're going to go about your way. I said, but then again, you may take a hit off a joint and be addicted for the rest of your life. I said, the problem is you don't know until you do it. So if you avoid doing it, then you don't have to worry about making that decision. I think it all goes back, Kirk and Cory, to what we talked about earlier, is that you've just got to be open and you've got to be present with them and just be honest. I've told both my kids on separate occasions that when I was wrong. And that's another thing I would tell a new parent, don't be afraid to admit you're wrong. There's all these books and manuals and YouTube videos about how to be a parent. Throw them away. There's no book on how to raise a kid because every kid's different. Every parent's different. All you can do is do the best job that you think you can do. And what I found is 99% of the time, that's going to be good enough.
Yeah. When you were saying that, it made me think that our role as parents is to guide our kids to where what I would call true happiness comes from, right? There's fleeting happiness. There's short-term happiness that can be found in many different ways. But if we can guide them and show them different choices, like you were mentioning, you can smoke this joint or not, but let me explain to you that two things could happen. And one of those choices turns into long-term happiness.
Yeah.
And one of those doesn't. And so I feel like as parents, we guide them and show them, hey, you're going to be able to choose on your own. That's your God-given right. But
right.
I'm going to explain to you as a parent where this is going to take you. And there's different paths you could go down. And the true happiness path looks a little bit more like this. Not that you're not going to make mistakes and not that you shouldn't, because sometimes mistakes are the only way to learn. But
right.
If we can keep them from making the big ones, the best we can, I think that's a role as a parent.
With both my kids, as far as drinking goes, which is huge and a huge problem in this country right now with underage drinking, is I said, look, I know you're going to do it. I did it. My parents did it. You're going to do it. I go, all I ask is that if you're at a party or somewhere and you've had something to drink, just call me. There won't be any repercussions. It's just, I don't want to get a call from the morgue. One night, my son played water polo and they were infamous for their parties. And one night he said, well, I'm going to a water polo party. And I said, okay. I said, just remember what I ask of you. And that's just to call me. And sure enough, about 12:30, he called and he said, hey, Dad, can you come get me? And I said, yes, I'll be right there. Never said another word about it. He got in the car. I said, how was the party? He said, great. I said, that's great. I'm glad you had a good time. And I said, especially thank you for calling me. And that was it. And you know what? I didn't make a big deal about it. I didn't say, I told you not to be drinking and you're out doing this, because all that's going to do is push him away from me. And I don't want him to be pushed away from me. I want him to know that he can come to me and talk to me about drinking. My favorite thing is we got off to college, and one night I flew home late from a gig. I got in probably 2 a.m. and I drove home. And as I pulled into the driveway, a cab pulled up behind me and my son got out of it. And I said, where's your car? He goes, we went to this bar and I had a couple of drinks. So I just left it there. I said, I said, all right, have a good night. And I literally said, God, thank you for giving me that, that I was able to. And it goes for any kind of vice, whether it's drugs, alcohol, sex. What the thing you don't want is you don't want your kids to not talk to you about it, because that's when people go, I don't know how this happened. I can tell you it happened. You didn't talk to your kids. You didn't make it a warming thing to say, hey, Dad, I want to ask you about something. And I know I can ask you because there's not going to be any judgment or punishment for this. Because they want to know, they're curious. And if we can just, and by the way, to all your listeners, I am not a doctor. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm just a guy who's gotten 2 kids to their 30s. I can tell you what's worked for me. Some people it may not work for. There's kids that have problems that need professional help. And if you feel that's the thing, don't be afraid to seek professional counseling. whatever it takes with your kids, do it. If it means you and your husband or wife going to counseling or getting professional help, if you're having trouble with family or kids, that's why they're there. Like I said, I flap my gums for a living, but I don't have any shingle on the wall that says, "Hey, Bill, you're qualified to give out psychiatric advice."
The people that have listened, I think, have probably at the end of this podcast say, I was really glad that I listened to this, not just because I thought that Bill was going to make me laugh.
Well, my hope is for people that might listen to this episode is that just know that you're not alone out there, that everybody's going through the same kind of stuff. Don't be afraid to open your soul, bare your soul, because to your wife or your husband, when it comes to parenting, that's the other thing I would tell a new parent, and I've thought about this, is you and your wife or your husband have to present a united front. You cannot, because they'll try to work you. Travis would go ask his mom something, she'd say no, and he'd come to me and I'd say, "What'd your mom say?" And he'd like, "Oh, you guys are like a team." I go, "Yeah, we are a team." You're not alone in this world, and know that. That there's avenues for, if you need some advice or you need more than that, you need help or whatever, that there's ways to get it, and don't be embarrassed by it. That's the thing. I think a lot of people get kind of like, "Oh, I don't want people to know we're going to see a marriage counselor." Hey, I'd have more respect hearing that than, you didn't. So yeah, I hope I was able to give a little bit of help here, that people don't know halfway through this podcast going, "This guy sucks."
Well, Bill, we end every podcast asking our guest the question of what they think it means to be a gentleman. And we've given you a little bit of time to think about that, because we found it's a more complex question.
It is way more complex than when I first read it.
Bill, what do you think a gentleman would be?
A gentleman to me is a way of life. It's not just opening doors for women. It's not being having manners. It's the way that a man leads his life. And I think if you lead your life in a gentleman kind of way, where you're kind to people, you're willing to help out, you're a good dad, you're a good role model. All those things, I think, go into what make a gentleman. It's not just being dapper and having a good looking suit on and stuff. It's the way you hold yourself in public and in your family's eyes. And I think that's what a gentleman is.
Great answer. I love it. And I learned a lot about you today, Bill, that I didn't know before, that you're not going to find on some online bio about Bill Engvall. I think that it's really neat to get to know you as a person, get to know you as a dad, now as a grandfather, and somebody who's now trying to go out into the world and better other people's lives through ministering to people. And that's really what that's about, is service. And you've just started a new one, and you're graduating college tomorrow. So anybody that's out there that thinks that they don't have what it takes to do another big thing in their life, you do. Go for it. I appreciate the example that you've set there, Bill. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Kirk Chugg.
And I'm Cory Moore.
Join us next week on The Gentleman Project. You guys go out, make it a great week.